She's on.
Ingrid. Okay, so we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. We've got that all cleared up. We'll bring it back to consent. We've had item A and D pulled. And I believe A was an abstention from Director Nelson. Do we need anything else for the minutes read into record?
We should probably just do a total separate vote for A at least, and then if, and D if it's considered separately.
Right. Okay.
So let's just do consent item 4A.
Right.
Approval
Okay.
of minutes. Approve the minutes from the August 17th, 2023 SBCAG board meeting.
All right. Do I have a motion
So move.
and a second?
Second.
Fontaine. Director Williams?
Aye.
Katz? She's on her way. Hartman? Nelson?
Abstain.
Levanino? Absent. Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Prody? Absent. Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 801.
All right. Item D. Please read that into record.
Item D, Highway 166 improvements in City of Guadalupe. Item D1, adopt resolutions 2324 approving cooperative agreement 050433 with Caltrans to acknowledge appropriation of funds for a project to fund improvements on Highway 166 and the Highway 166 highway intersection. And 4D2, approve the use of $3,400,000 in cost savings from the Measure A North County Regional Program Reserve as previously authorized by the North County's Regional Planning Committee. 4D3, approve and authorize the chair to execute a cooperative agreement with Caltrans 050433 for the contribution of funds to have Caltrans complete the environmental design, right-of-way, permitting, and construction of improvements on Highway 166, including the Highway 166 Highway 1 intersection of which SBCAG's local fund contribution is $4 million. Item 4D4, approve and authorize the executive director to execute a closure statement in accordance with Caltrans Cooperative Agreement 050433. And 4D5, approve and authorize the chair to execute a Measure A cooperative agreement with the City of Guadalupe in the amount not to exceed $4,450,000 and pursuant to the Measure A investment plan Project Guadalupe circulation improvements.
All right. Your questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I see in the discussion that there were two options before the Northern County Subregional, and we chose option 2. I just want to confirm that moving forward.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's a more collaborative approach with not just SBCAG and Caltrans, but including the City of Guadalupe and the Pasadena development. Many of us have also been reached out to by Taylor Farms, which has the large processing facility that's adjacent to these spots as well, and I know there's some issues potentially with circulation there. Can you talk to me just a little bit? And I'd love to hear from the mayor as well. I know I think we're going to all fall under his lead on this, but I thought it was appropriate for us to poll and just ask a few questions, especially for their benefit, seeing this move forward. Are those discussions ongoing? Will we see it again? Will we have any say-so of this once we approve this agreement? Are we not going to see it again? Will we get the approved final design? Those are the kind of things I'm asking.
Certainly, yeah. So there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, I'd certainly welcome Director Julian's response to that as well. But did you want to say something?
I do real
Yep.
quick. And just kind of, I wanted to bring this up too, and thank you for doing that, because there's quite a bit of effort that went forward making this thing happen, including physical visits to Taylor Farms with Julianne, with Taylor Farms main folks from Salinas coming down and actually walking through. I think there's a whole bunch of
I was there, and John Olenek from Caltrans were at a meeting with Taylor Farms.
The city has walked through that because the issue was the traffic exit through there. The first issue way back was a roundabout, so that went away. But there was considerable of communication with both Taylor Farms, the businesses around there, the community around there, which is Treasure Park, and also with Pasadena. We met, both the city and myself met several times, and I know that Caltrans met with Smith, the actual manager of DJ Farms and Pasadena. So there's been a tremendous amount of communication, including communication with San Maria Valley Railroad, which is another issue. So I do appreciate the staff, Caltrans, and and the community for really supporting this because it's much needed. And it's something that's basically, it will set in the motion a lot of much improvements to the city of Guadalupe, so, and the Taylor Farms and all the other businesses there. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add something, and then if you have further questions, Director Nelson, and we have Mr. Olenek here as well from Caltrans, who was at the meeting with Taylor Farms, is that when we presented this item to the North County Committee, as you had indicated, there was two options, and we had already heard at that time, both through your office, Director Lavanino, and others, Mayor Julian, that Taylor Farms. So we had a meeting, we had some communication with them. We met with Julianne Hill and a number of the people that run the Taylor Farms operation. Even though they didn't have kind of a financial stake in that, they're obviously a stakeholder, and they had concerns. And so I think the meeting went very well in the sense that Caltrans was able to explain the larger picture and how we're going about this and this collaborative approach to this larger consolidated project, and whether they could accommodate what ultimately were their driveway needs entering off 166, and then other options that perhaps John can talk about related to the primary issue was trucks leaving their operational facility and wanting to make a left turn across what would be a larger and wider Highway 166 at that time, adjacent to the railroad tracks. And so if the board approves this item today, obviously this would go into the Caltrans project process, and maybe John can both talk about the planned community outreach and involvement with stakeholders.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. John Olenek, Caltrans District 5. To the Taylor Farms, it was a really productive meeting. It was, we got a lot of good insights into see their operations and their needs, and Taylor Farms, it's going to be a great element to the city of Guadalupe. We look forward to their build out. I got a chance to visit Taylor Farms up in Gonzales before. It's a fantastic campus, and it's going to be really nice improvements to the city of Guadalupe as well. Their concern was about access to 166. We're meeting that concern and putting it together with our safety needs, with our projects that'll improve the sidewalks and the bike facilities and the kids and people who are walking. That we were able to discuss all that, put that on the table, and come to a resolution. So we're going to be able to accommodate their desire to make those left turns out. We are even with one of our projects. They also wanted to extend the driveway width, and we were already going to do that with one of our projects. So they were excited to hear that news. All these things are still in draft design and discussion, but it's looking positive in the right direction. So things are lining up well. That driveway access, we did talk to them honestly about thinking long term as well, because ideally, as we encourage more people to walk and bike, that conflict is something that we want to keep our eyes on for the safety side of it. So we encourage Taylor Farms to consider their long term access with their neighbors on the property. The forget the name, 123 Cannabis, or there's a I forget the name, but because there's a parcel there that might also facilitate long-term safer movement, away from 166 directly at that location. But for now, I think we're in a really good place, and they were really pleased. And even as early as this week, we've had conversations with them, giving them some updates. So it's been good. And to the engagement side, as we go forward with this work and this, this approval you're going to hopefully provide today, that's going to allow us to really have an excellent project that's going to be transformative for the city. And we're going to, at a point in the near future too, want to work with you, Director Julian, and the community for some public outreach to get to kind of share all the good work we've done together. Thank you.
Director Nelson.
Thank you. So just a few questions and follow up on that. One of the questions I had was, is this our last stop at SBCAG for this project? I mean, I know there's going to be some community outreach. I'm not a supervisor that represents Guadalupe, but I represent a lot of agricultural areas. I know Supervisor Lavanino, and of course, Mayor Julian will be very engaged in this process moving forward, but that was kind of one of my concerns. I know in the past, sometimes Caltrans will go off and do what Caltrans wants to do once we give them the money, and we had to be very careful with that. Black Road and 166 is a example of that, where if we would have not been engaged here at SBCAG, there'd be a roundabout going in there. And so, those are the kind of the things that I'm seeing moving forward that we should be keeping an eye on. So that was one of my questions. Is this our last stop for discussion and engagement on this project moving forward?
I would say no. We're going to be a vested partner. We're a financial contributor. We're a sponsor to the project. That being said, Caltrans will be the implementation lead, and they're the owner and operator of the state highway. And so, I recall, and I was here when we lived through the roundabout discussions and the traffic signal at Black Road. And fortunately, at Highway 166, we've already done the effort to say that that's not a likely scenario at that location because of the number of constraints at that location. But there's a number of other traffic signals that Caltrans will have to go through their process to study the intersection control and what's the best scenario for those intersections. And we don't want to presume what that would be, but there would be, and we could schedule those types of discussions for the board when those considerations are being made.
Yeah, and so that's where I'm trying to get to is we got 3.4 million out of SBCAG we're going to put in this project. I like it to come back to us before we actually, the build, once the design is done. So if it keeps us a little bit in the driver's seat working with Caltrans. Caltrans wants our money. There are 3.4 coming from SBCAG as well as the $4 million, $4.5 million coming from the city of Guadalupe. So I think that it's appropriate. We're dedicating those funds. We're planning on spending those funds on this project, but I think to make sure we keep Caltrans honest in this process, we should get a look at it at the end, make sure everybody gets a thumbs up, and then we can, disperse those funds. That's where I'm concerned about. If we just disperse those funds today and then we kind of let go of the rope, we lose some of our control in the process. So that's what I'm after. And let me leave that to say a couple of my other concerns here that I want to make sure I address. It's not just Taylor Farms, it's also it's truck traffic through the city of Guadalupe that I'm concerned about, and that's one of the things that if we don't do this right, it really impacts that general area more beyond just their operations. We do want Taylor Farms to be successful. They're looking to make significant investments in the city of Guadalupe. There's hundreds of employees in Guadalupe and the Santa Maria Valley that will be working there, millions of dollars of wages with the additional investments that they're making. So it's something we want to encourage and be working cooperatively with, but it also has some other greater concerns in the area. So as long as we have an ability moving forward to have design come back to SBCAG or some other body, I'm okay moving forward. But if it doesn't, and this is our last stop, then I can't support. So I just want to make sure I hear correctly on the record that we will get another look at this when the design is complete.
So there will be a project development team set up, and there'll be active participation by SBCAG staff, and I assume the City of Guadalupe will assign somebody, and we'll engage on that. And if there's any particular issues that rise, that we'll bring back to the board, obviously, when we get to those key decision points. And so the most particular one is when we have to go through the traffic analysis study and kind of identify, that intersection, and we can come and give a summary report as to the results at that time. Yeah.
So can we see before construction? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, definitely before. That's all done before construction. And in fact, our financial contribution in the agreements doesn't really, the majority of the funds don't really kick in until construction. We do have a small amount of project support funds that are contributed. So.
Well, that's what I would like to prove at a later date is the actual deployment of those project delivery funds and the actual construction funds based on a design that's acceptable to the City of Guadalupe primarily. And so that's what I'm after. Thank you.
I appreciate that, if I may, through the chair. As we may know that the new school is going to start in that development, which is it's going to be it's not TK, but it's there's 7th and 8th. It's going to be over there. There's 18 acres of commercial along that stretch from Flower Street, just east of Flower Street, all the way through to the railroad tracks. There's another 370 homes that are going to be built on the south side. It's called Pasadena South, on the south side of Santa Maria Valley Railroad. So, without this to happen, we'd be bottleneck, wouldn't be able to go anywhere. And I'm really happy with how Pasadena and DJ Farms is working with Caltrans and with SBCAG, because they're asked to put in a significant amount of money into this project, and you will have community input. A lot. You'll have a ton of community input. So, thank you for bringing it up, and thank staff for being there.
Director Patino.
Yes, thank you. And I won't reiterate and go over Director Nelson's concerns. Those are also my concerns. I don't want to see traffic diverted in downtown Guadalupe and then across to the elementary school. Guadalupe is really a pedestrian-friendly community. You've got a lot of kids walking and running around there, and then going off on Seamus Road. I just wouldn't think that would be a good idea. So thank you very much for bringing that up, Director Ellison.
Any questions from directors in Santa Barbara? All right, hearing none, we'll ask for public comment on this item. Is there any public comment?
Chair Osborne, there's no request for public comment either here or online.
In Santa Barbara?
No public comment here either.
All right, thank you. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Second, Patino.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Chair,
Yes.
could we make the motion for all B through G at this point? The whole
All
consent
right.
calendar, just because I think we're there.
All right, okay. That's great.
Thank you, Chair.
And I'm sure Patino agrees.
Agreed.
All right, even better.
Director Williams. Dr.
That was
Williams?
a aye.
Thank you. Caps?
Aye.
Hartman? Nelson?
Aye.
Lavanino, absent. Infanti?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti? Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 10-0.
All right. We will now move to item 5 for review, discussion, action items. And Madam Clerk, would you please read 5A into the record?
Thank you, Chair Osborne. 5A, designated recipient options for Santa Barbara Urbanized Area Federal Transit Administration funding programs. 5A1, receive presentation on designated recipient options for administration and suballocation of Federal Transit Administration funding programs for Santa Barbara Urbanized Area. 5A2, discuss designated recipients options for Santa Barbara Urbanized Area. 5A3, approve a designated recipient option.
Thank you, Chair Osborne. Directors, can you hear me in Santa Maria?
We can.
Good, thank you. All right, good morning, Sarkis Kachak, Director of Programming, here to provide the presentation. Morning. So Madam Clerk read the recommendation into record. So today we are here to give you an update on the discussions related to the Federal Transit Administration designated recipient options for the Santa Barbara urbanized area. We've presented to your board a few times on this item, and so I won't go too much detail on the background again, but what we need today is direction from the board on designated recipient for the Santa Barbara urbanized area. So in that way we can submit a recommendation to the Governor of California for the Santa Barbara urbanized area for Federal Transit Administration funding. There are changes to the funding programs, but there's also an opportunity to generate additional revenue through some of the programs for some services. So I'll detail that today. These are the 4 programs that we've shared with you before. A couple of them are programs that are familiar to the Santa Barbara urbanized area. There's a new program called the 5337 State of Good Repair. So that's capital assistance for high intensity systems. And so that's a new program, but the other 3 programs are traditional programs for the urbanized area. This is a slide we shared before. This is the list of transit operators eligible for funding in the urbanized area and that provide services as well.
Excuse me, Sarkis.
Yes.
We need to present your PowerPoint via the system versus the Zoom because it won't be on the YouTube channel if it's not. So
Okay.
And we're also having trouble hearing you, Sarkis, so I'm not sure. I'm guessing it's the room that's causing the echo, but.
And we're turning down the volume.
Okay,
and
we'll
so
see if that
should
works.
help.
But if we interrupt you, it's because we're having trouble hearing you.
Okay, no worries. I'm used to being
That's
interrupted.
better. That's better.
All right.
So I think we
so-
have the PowerPoint up, correct? Yeah. I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, so just confirming, I can run the slide deck from my computer.
Probably not.
Okay, so I will lean on someone else to help me with this.
Yeah, we have Aaron here to do that.
Okay.
So we'll.
So I will stop sharing.
Yeah.
And then
please.
I will give power back to you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we got it. Thank you.
Okay. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so again, these are the providers in the Santa Barbara urbanized area and those eligible for funding from the Federal Transit Administration programs. Next slide, please. Okay, and sure what's going on there, but these are the options we provided to the board previously last month. The first option was SBCAG as the sole designated recipient for the funding programs. And then the second option was SBCAG as a dual designated recipient with Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transit District. And so we received board direction last month to come back this month with additional information, including on what the funding splits by program look like based on each option, which we did provide in the staff reports. And after meeting with Santa Barbara MTD, we reached concurrence that the funding split by program and by operator would be the same under either option A or option B. So next slide, please. And this is a slide we shared previously in terms of how the administration of the programs would work under each option. Option A is the first one with SBCAG as the sole designated recipient, and then option B as the dual designated recipient. And so I'll go into more detail on what the dual designated recipient looks like in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So since the August board meeting, staff did reach out with the Federal Transit Administration, and we did learn that there are instances of dual designated recipients or more than one designated recipient in their Region 9. And then we also met with Santa Barbara MTD staff multiple times, and their general manager, Jerry Estrada, is here with us in the room. And so we did reach, like I mentioned, we reached concurrence on the funding splits by program. And MTD expressed to us that their request for dual designated recipient was to have more of a role in terms of the services that are funded within their district and to be a part of the selection process for projects. So next slide, please. These are the funding splits by program by operator, and this was also in the staff report. And so you can see for the 5307 and the 5339A programs, there's a population generated portion of the revenue. And so under a dual designated recipient, the funding would be under the Santa Barbara MTD program of projects, and then SBCAG would administer the program of projects for what we call the attributable or revenues generated by service factors. And then the 5310 elderly disabled program has an amount of $265,000 that's based on population. And then the 5337 program, this program for now is one that would be focused on passenger rail, and passenger rail would be generating the revenue for this program. Next slide, please. So after the last board meeting and after a consultation with Federal Transit Administration and Santa Barbara MTD, staff is here today to recommend the dual designated recipient option for the Santa Barbara urbanized area. So this table gives you an idea of which programs would be administered by which entity. And so for 5307, SBCAG would administer the performance-based or attributable funding, And then for services outside going in and out of the district, the Santa Barbara MTD district, Santa Barbara MTD would administer the population-based funding and as well as the attributable or performance revenue that they would generate from Santa Barbara MTD service. And this would apply also to the FTA 5337 program. The two programs that have a little bit of a caveat, the first one is the FTA 5310 Elderly Disabled Program. This is a program for nonprofits to secure funding to help replace vehicles and for operations. And so due to the regional aspect of this program and the fact that SBCAG has a transit advisory committee, and SBCAG is also leading the effort on a required coordinated human services transportation plan. And the final factor that SBCAG administers a similar program through the state called the Access for All. We agreed with MTD that SBCAG would administer the first call for projects for 3 years. And so what SBCAG would like to do is to bundle the money with the Access for All so we can have a bigger call for projects since they're eligible recipients for those programs. And then for the 5337, we'll lead this program initially, as we mentioned, based on the passenger rail element. And then after 3 years, we'll huddle up with MTD again and then go forward with that on future administration of the funding. I'll stop there to see if there are any questions on the recommendation.
Director Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand the district, and I understand this Santa Barbara MTD, so that serves obviously the South Coast. Those same types of services in the North County, how is that SBCAG that'll be administering those funds?
Yes, so any service that goes from North County into the Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transit District or from Ventura County into the district, SBCAG will administer the funding, the program of projects or call for projects for those programs.
I think the question was that this is only concerning the South Coast urbanized area.
Gotcha.
We are not discussing Santa Maria, Lompoc, or San Ynez Valley. So those are still being the designated recipient for those areas is Caltrans via the state process.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification. And then my second question has to do with, I saw CalVans, which I'm the representative for SBCAG on there. Can you talk to me about what the opportunities that would be for CalVans to access some of these revenues, what that looks like, and how they would go about that?
Yes, so Chair Osborne, Director Nelson, so what happens is an operator reports their data into what's called the National Transit Database, and then that goes into the formulas that the Federal Transit Administration has. And so we'd be able to identify whether CalVans is providing data into the system for an urbanized area, and then if there's revenue generated, then we can work with the entities that submitted for that as part of the selection of projects through the funding.
So CalVans is very unique. It's bringing vans all throughout the state of California. So there's a lot that are passing through this urbanized district. So, how does that get captured? Many of them won't be necessarily housed in the Santa Barbara urbanized area, but they may be working there.
Yeah.
And so, how does that get?
I'll get this one,
captured?
Sarkis. So, like Sarkis said, it depends on where they report that mileage and that activity. If they report it for the South Coast urbanized area, then that activity will be credited to our urbanized area, which will result in funding. So we can see that the source data, and so when that happens, then we'll bring it back, and it will be up to SBCAG board to allocate those monies. So if we get credit for CalVan's activity, it's still up to the board of how to spend that money and where to put it, and we'll bring those options to the board for your consideration.
Thank you, Margie.
Any questions from anyone else before Sarkis continues?
Yeah, I have a question, Director Rouse.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sarkis, the passenger rail portion of that, can you break down just real briefly how that's purposed and to where those funds go, and are they supplemental to either infrastructure or actually operations? What do they do?
So it's similar to the other programs where once the passenger rail service is up and running, then the data gets reported to the National Transit Database. FTA tells us how much funding was generated for that program. And then when we know how much money is available, then it'll come back to your board and we'd be able to program the money to either capital or operations for rail service.
Okay, so we're talking about a potential future light rail.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Director. Are we going to hear from FTE?
I'm not sure. It's up to.
I would be interested in your thoughts on this.
Sarkis, have you completed your report yet?
I have not. I just have a couple more slides.
Oh, sorry
Okay.
about that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just a duplication of the prior slide, and this lays out the process. So after the data is reported to the National Transit Database and the Federal Transit Administration gives us our funding amounts, then we'll work with MTD on doing what's called a call for projects or project selection process. And then projects will come back to your board for inclusion in the Federal Transportation Improvement Program. Next slide, please. And this is the slide detailing the Federal Transportation Improvement Program. Next slide, please. So this is I think the final slide. This just gives you the schedule. So after we receive direction from the board today, we'll work with Santa Barbara MTD. We'll come back to your board next month with a memorandum of understanding on the roles and responsibilities. And then we'll also come back with a letter that we would submit to the Governor of California on the recommendation for dual designated recipient. And after that, more fun stuff. We'll come back to you with all the apportionments and then the call for projects process shortly thereafter. Next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation. We wanted to thank the board for your input, and we wanted to thank Jerry and MTD for meeting with us and going through the review of everything. So that's it for us. Thank you.
I just want to remind people in Santa Barbara real quick to avoid talking because the owl picks up everything and it becomes really hard to hear the main person that's speaking. That would be appreciated. Thanks.
Director Patino.
Yeah, this was really sort of hard to hear, but sorry, because I want to ask you something. In my feelings about it, I think local control is really important, but when we cross this 200,000 person threshold and become an urbanized area, does this happen after the next census, which is 10 years from now, or does this happen after the next cycle?
So through the chair, Director Patino, what triggered this was that it was a result of the 2020 U.S. Census. And so after folks submitted their information to the U.S. Census, and the U.S. Census aggregated everything and then looked at the various geographic areas, the Santa Barbara urbanized area crossed the 200,000 threshold. And then it took a couple of years for the federal government and Federal Transit Administration to let us know that of the change. For the Santa Maria urbanized area, if it goes from a small urbanized area to a large urbanized area in the 2030 census, then we would probably know in 2032 on the Santa Maria urbanized area. I'm sorry.
Okay, as you know, up here in North County, there's been a sort of history of getting shortchanged many times, and we don't like to lose our local control. But what if the rules change, and then by and the borders change, because the federal government could very well do that, change the borders of which we would be considered a designated urbanized area. Anyway, that's my concerns, because I just want to protect the Santa Maria area, because we're the ones in this county that are growing with leaps and bounds.
Yes. So I think just to let you know, Director Patino, that we would follow a similar process that we did for the Santa Barbara urbanized area, where we would work with the board and the city of Santa Maria and the impacted agencies on, the path forward with that. So if it's out of our control on whether the rules change by the U.S. Census and by FTA, but there's obviously a commitment from staff that we would work collaboratively with the board and partners on that.
Okay, so be sure and put a sticky note on that one.
I have many sticky notes, and I'll just add one more, Director.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the directors in Santa Barbara or Santa Maria?
This is Director Hartman, Chair Osborne. I just want to thank staff. This was a really sticky matter, and you've negotiated with MTD, and we're really pleased with the outcome and saved us a difficult vote.
And I was going to wait till comments, but I want to chime in agreement. Just obviously the willingness seemed like we were going to be at an impasse, the willingness of staff to keep on meeting, talking. Obviously the path that you followed was to look to see whether there was going to be some substantive conflicts, and you worked through the issues in advance, which meant that there was less of a need to have the power struggle if you worked out the possible issues in advance. So I think that really was productive and a good route to manage conflict that way.
All right, seeing no other directors wanting to make questions, we will go to public comment on this item. If you would like to speak to it, is there anybody online?
Chair Osborne, we have no attendees requesting public comment.
All right, is there anyone in Santa Barbara?
We do have Jerry Estrada from Santa Barbara MTD that would like to say a few words.
The floor is yours.
It's fine. Jump on with this thing.
Thank you. Just quickly like to thank SBCAG staff for working with us throughout this. It wasn't easy, but I think we struck a really good compromise that's going to serve the Santa Barbara urbanized area really well, and really requires us to work together, which is something we were really pleased with. And thank the SBCAG board for all of your input and the MTD board support. So just wanted to thank everyone. We support this this recommendation.
Thank you. Seeing no others for public comment, we'll close public comment and bring it back, and I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move option B, recommended action.
I'll second that.
Motion and second. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Lavanino, absent. Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti, absent. Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-0.
All right. Madam Clerk, please read item B into the record.
5B, Regional Broadband Update. 5B1, receive an update on implementation efforts related to regional broadband pursuant to the Broadband Strategic Plan, priority areas, and requirements under the local agency technical assistance. 5B2, authorize the release of requests for proposals, RFPs, for consultants to complete programmatic EIR and additional high-level design to fulfill work tasks outlined in LATA grant.
Executive Director, floor is yours.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you so much. So much has happened with broadband in the last few months, and we've been so quick to put things on the agenda, get your approval, and move things along. We thought we'd take a break a little bit and take a breath and give you an update of actually what's been happening. So the next slide, please. Who's ever controlling that? We want to give you some background of what's been happening and the next steps moving forward. So I'm going to just take the first couple of slides and then I'm going to hand it over to the expert to tell you the details of that. So just to recap where we've been, a couple years ago during the pandemic, we all were struggling with online and getting our business done. And the idea of broadband and the lack of access throughout our county became evident, and we wanted to do something about it. This did not only happen, obviously, in Santa Barbara. This is nationwide and statewide. So there was a lot of funding opportunities that were talked about at that time, and the board wanted to do something about it. So I was contacted by several board members saying, what can we do at SBCAG? And we convened a broadband summit of whatnot, and we talked about what we wanted to do. And I was directed to come up with a strategic plan moving forward. So we did that. We formed the Broadband Alliance in Santa Barbara County in October 2021 with the goal of getting a broadband strategic plan done within 1 year, which is pretty amazing for government, right? So we did that. We adopted in 2022 of December, we adopted the broadband strategic plan that was presented to each of the cities and the county, and it was consensus that we identified the priorities in that plan, which were great for moving forward. So that broadband strategic plan has been so helpful to me because it identified what you wanted to have accomplished. We were able to apply for the LATA grant, the local agency technical assistance grant. We had a little bit of snafu there, if you remember. We ended up, because we're an MPO and a RTPA, we weren't eligible to receive the funds. If we were just an RTPA, would have been fine, but the federal designation inhibited us from applying directly. It was gracious enough with the county to apply on our behalf. So since we were able to apply for a little more, we applied for $1 million instead of just $500,000. So, and since then, we've been successful in changing the law. That got signed by the governor, correct? Yes. So we changed the law because we didn't think it was fair to eliminate regional agencies from this source of funding because we thought it made sense for us to take on this lead. So that law's changed, but still we're under the old law where we weren't eligible. So we have an agreement with the county to implement the LATA grant of $1 million and to pursue other funding. So I want to, before Fred gets up, and I might be taking some of his thunder, I want to thank the connections that we have with RCRC and the Golden State Connect Authority. I think that was what that was called. Director Nelson is a member of that. They are awesome. They are hitting the ground running and have the resources and the consultants on staff, and I'm amazed about the progress we're making with them and the collaboration with the county and with the broadband, the Golden State Connect and SBCAG. I think the nimbleness of SBCAG, we're able to get things on our agenda and get your approval and move forward. I really appreciate that because time is of the essence with these funding sources. What's the day? Today's the day, or tomorrow's the day of we're applying for funding for another $15 million to implement some projects. So I'm going to let Fred take it from here to give you the nitty-gritty details, but I'm just really excited about this project. It's been a lot of fun. I see progress being made, and I want to thank you for giving this, delegating this authority to SBCAG and letting us move this forward. So thank you. Passing it over to Fred. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. And good morning, directors again. So Fred Luna, maybe just as opening comments, I'll build upon what Margie said. It's like not often that you've been in a position that I've been for 30 years and you get to learn something entirely new. And so I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but we do have the experts on the team that are working closely, and with us, and then the partnership we have with the county and going forward with our local cities and our member agencies there as we continue to look at implementing the long-term vision. I think the broadband strategic plan, as Margie had indicated, is really continually to being referred to as we go through the implementation process. What did we say? What were our goals? And so you can see 3 of the major goals here. Up here is that goal number 1 is really pretty much self-explanatory. That lacked the infrastructure to provide access to people, and so we needed to build infrastructure in the county and across the state and across the nation to make access for all. The second goal is really another impediment or hurdle towards access is that it was an affordability concept. So a lot of the funding programs that we're applying for have that as a component. Also working with the internet service providers to make sure that they're continuing to promote cost-effective funding programs for folks, as well as other agencies. And then the last one is really part of that long-term vision. You're building out that initial connectivity, but you also want to build resiliency and redundancy in the system so that if there's outages, you have that backup supply. So next slide. So Margie mentioned this. We were awarded with the county. So SBCAG is a sub-recipient to the county as the main recipient for the local agency technical assistance grant through the California Public Utilities Commission. There's $1 million. It really covered 3 primary work tasks. High-level network design, which, just to explain the terminology, and I'm learning it myself, is that we're building upon what's called a statewide middle mile network that statewide agencies are, and then the high level really gets to those underserved and unserved locations. The programmatic EIR, which is kind of an environmental document, to cover the areas that we're looking to implement services on. And then Margie mentioned that there was a governance component related in the LATA grant. And so in the coming months, we'll be investigating that a little bit more at the staff level and bringing back some recommendations, but really looking at where should the decision-making land for this across Santa Barbara County, and originally a lot of the discussions in the broadband strategic plan identified maybe SBCAG being that agency, and that what would that mean as far as changing joint powers authority and such. So that's something that we're going to be working on and then bring back in the coming months some recommendations on that. Next slide. So this is the building upon in order to do our connections to those people that we want to, that are currently unserved and underserved. And what you're seeing here is the statewide middle mile network, and it's implemented by the California Department of Technology through the Golden State Network. And so there's a phase 1 component and then a phase 2 component. Phase 1 is fully funded. So back a few years back, $3.9 billion were allocated for what was the intent was to build 10,000 miles of connectivity throughout the state. Because of cost increases and such, that's been reduced about 17%. So the current plan is to build an 8,300 mile of network. And then so that's really being done in a number of different ways. What they call IRUs, or indefeasible rights of use. These are basically lines that are existed out there for transcontinental or connectivity, for which there's capacity and there's rights to use, and those can't be annulled at any point. And then new construction. So there's a couple options there that Caltrans will be building through either new construction or joint build arrangements. And then there's also some purchases, a minor portion of the land, the rights that are going to be implemented. And then under phase 2, and this is important to know, how does this help Santa Barbara County? So, and phase 2 is not funded yet, but you can see here, based on phase 2 in the purple color or the lavender color, there is that at least what we're seeing here is that in phase 2 we're able to get some additional North County resiliency. And we're also able to serve communities that were high priorities in the broadband strategic plan, like Los Alamos, Santa Maria, Orchid, and Buellton as kind of secondary efforts. Right now, our current applications that Margie mentioned that are going forward, and I'll touch on that in a second, address some of the top priority areas that were in the county. The one thing it doesn't do in phase 2, and I think this came up at the Board of Supervisors meeting with, is that it doesn't provide that connectivity to the South Coast, that resiliency through Highway 154. You can say it covers part of that, but doesn't go all the way in case there's outages on the South Coast. There would be another way from the north to go to provide that connectivity. So I'm a little bit behind on this. I think what we are doing for the federal funding account grant. So just backing up a little bit, Margie mentioned our relationship with RCRC and their arm, which is the Golden State Connect Authority. So we have a current MOU that this board approved to target 4 locations, the city of Guadalupe and the Guadalupe area, Casmelia, Cuyama and New Cuyama, and Los Alamos. And so the interesting story here is that we proposed all 4 of those locations, which were top priorities in the broadband strategic plan. And we went through that, and then there was a change in the statewide map. And you can see on the Los Alamos, it's actually on the phase 2 alignment there, and so it's not supported by phase 1. We went through the exercise of whether we could provide connection to Los Alamos in phase 1, and it seemed like it was going to be too costly because we have about a $15 million limit for our county. However, RCRC kind of reworked the numbers, and they said, well, let's go ahead and apply for Los Alamos because it can be ready for when phase 2 is ready to go. And so we'll develop the design and get that all ready, and it does, what it does is it maximizes our request for funding in this current allocation. It makes us ready to leverage that in the future. What we get is 50 miles of connections. We're able to eat into that underserved and unserved population that was in the county by providing service to 1,000 new locations. And then, like I mentioned before, it maximizes our application, and those will be going in tomorrow. We've been working collaboratively with the county and some of the other partners that were instrumental in the broadband strategic plan, and RCRC, of course, to get that those funding applications in. So what we're asking the SBCAG board today is like thinking about next steps. Okay, so we have those 4 priority locations, but there's other areas that were documented in the broadband strategic plan that we want to get going in the county. And so what we're asking the board to approve a request for proposals for SBCAG to hire a consultant or consultants that would perform or complete a programmatic EIR for other areas in the county, and then high-level design for those areas. And so we would initiate that within the next month or so, and then hopefully we can get them on board by the early next year. We have 2 years under the LATA grant to exercise these implementation efforts. So this just gives you a snapshot timeline of the current efforts that we're going through. So on the right side, maybe you can focus on that, is as Margie mentioned, our MOU that came to the board with RCRC in July, and then immediately having meetings and getting those applications in. So those will go in at tomorrow. And then we expect to hear back based on input we've gotten from their agency by the spring of next year, where awards would be made. And then it's a process of obtaining permits, getting those environmentally cleared, and then going through implementation. And that should take 6 months and then another 18 months. So looking at a timeline based on the time provided by RCRC of early 2026 on that. And then on the left, with the board's approval today, we would issue an RFP and then start looking at some of the other areas in the county. And so we would do the high-level design and the environmental work, and then be ready for funding opportunities going forward. What we do know is there's funding from the Broadband Equity and BEAD, they call it, federal program that's coming out next year, and And so we want to be in a good position to take advantage of that going forward. And so our LATA grant, like I mentioned before, is a 2-year time frame. It ends in May of 25. And like Margie said, we plan to come back to give updates to the board as we're making progress on this. But we thought a lot has gone on in the last few months that we would just bring these few items to the board, get some actions before the board on that one item that I have here in my recommendation to authorize the release of the RFP and then answer any questions. So happy to do that.
Thank you. Director Infante.
I think this is a great idea. I like what's going on. I see it. I'm sorry that I'm only in phase 2 in Solvang, but we can wait on that. We're doing okay. But what I'm curious about is who maintains it? You show it all being done by 2026. Who takes care of it? Who fixes it if some contractor digs a hole and breaks into the fiber? What happens?
So maybe I'll answer that in 2 ways. So in the first phase, and then I might rely on Director Nelson here as he's a board member with RCRC, is that the elegant solution with them being involved with us is that they design, build, and maintain going forward. And so as far as those first 4 locations. And so that really seemed eye-opening for us when we met with them as far as that decision didn't, because a lot of our local agency meetings, we were saying, like, you look around the table, like, who wants to maintain it? Nobody really wants to take on more maintenance at the local agency level, right? And so, Director Nelson, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. RCRC, and if I could take just a step back and answer some of those questions about this. It's a fortunate thing that I've been able to serve on the RCRC board, and then I got promoted to the executive board, so now I serve on that as well, representing the Southern California counties and the Central Coast counties, as well as the San Joaquin Valley on the RCRC board. So I get to have a front row seat on a lot of these discussions and advocate for all of you. Golden State Connect Authority is one of the smaller organizations under the RCRC umbrella. They also have Golden State Natural Resources, National Homebuyers Fund, Golden State Finance Authority. It's a really great organization that's really getting after it and making sure that they're lobbying on our behalf. And so they've been a leader on this. This was initially started, Golden State Connect Authority, with a $2 million investment by the RCRC board. And we're actually looking at maybe delivering up to $1 billion of projects over the next couple of years. We've been driving this legislation at the state level, because that's where the needs are in our rural counties. And as you remember, that's sitting on the executive board, Santa Barbara County is absolutely represented and advocated for in that space. We've partnered with Utopia Fiber, and this is a company, or it's not just a private company. It's kind of like a joint powers out of Utah that has done this in Utah and have had a lot of success, and they've been moving out here and partnering with RC on this. And what they do is they have this high-level design. They do the design build, and then it's an open access network. So this isn't just bringing in a new provider that will go gobble up all those rates. There will be a fee for that service. It will be minimal, but it will actually create, for these areas that are served by this fiber, an open access network where people can choose their provider. And hopefully that obviously drives rates down, especially in these communities like Guadalupe and Casmelia and Nucuyama, where cost is a big issue. And when you only have one provider, we know rates go much higher than necessary. So it's a huge opportunity for us. And I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but there's been some updates to the phase 1 and phase 2 since. I don't know if Fred's aware that they've actually got rid of phase 2 now. It's one big phase, and they're going to be doing it in order because there was so much pushback on the phase 2 mapping that was unfunded. So they've dissolved that. That doesn't solve the funding issue because it's still underfunded. And so that it's kind of like what we do with the unmet needs or unspent funds that we do here at SBCAG with Measure A. We're doing something similar at the state. So we can continue to move projects. Projects that are on phase 2 won't necessarily have to wait till all the phase 1 projects are done. They can start to move in concert there. I continue to advocate for that phase 2 piece because of the importance to the San Ynez Valley, and I really want to make sure that gets connected at some point to the phase 1 middle mile. I think redundancy is a huge issue for our county. and something we absolutely need to address. The Santa Maria Valley was the largest urban area in the state left
That
out of phase
wasn't on
one.
phase one, yeah.
So we've got a good story to tell out of our county to advocate for more. All of our lobby firms, whether it's through RCRC or the county or other partners, are getting after that to make sure that phase 2 is more like phase 1B on that section there. So that helps.
That helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from directors?
Can you repeat that stat? So Santa Maria was the largest underserved area in the state.
It was actually the largest urbanized area that was left out of phase 1 of the middle mile. So we actually pulled all the top urbanized communities throughout the state of California. Our office did, and they were all touching the middle mile within less than 5 miles. Santa Maria was not. So there's a section of Santa Maria that touches that barely 5 miles out, but we were definitely the most disadvantaged community when the first phase 1 rolled out, and I think that's one of the reasons why phase 2 went away, is because of some of that advocacy and pointing that out. So yeah, we were right there at the top, unfortunately.
Hearing no further questions, we'll open for public comment. Is there anyone wishing to speak?
Chair Osborne, I have no requests online for public comment and nobody in the building.
Anyone in Santa Barbara?
No request for public comment from Santa Barbara.
All right, I will bring it back for either further comments or a motion. Director Patino.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Luna, and I really want to thank the SBCAG staff. I know during COVID, when we all got together, and I think it was Director Hartman who made the motion to start this whole committee, and I really want to thank her, because it's sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and we were all on board. This is probably one of the few committees that I've ever been on where we just said, let's just go for it, and we just ran with it. And we would vote on something one day, and by the next morning, you guys were working on it. And so I just think, and also kudos to all the directors on this, and how important it was. And we saw in our districts, I saw in my district in Santa Maria, it wasn't the lack of accessibility, it was the lack of affordability. I called Salud Carvajal's office and said, I need one of your aides to sit in our meetings on this, because she needs, I know what we need, but I was having trouble explaining the whole broadband concept. So she was able to do that and make that connection. So when we go out and make the ask to people, we need to know, they need to know what our needs are. And I just think it was really important how this has moved forward so expeditiously. So I thank all of you for that.
Thank you. I will say I've been working on this since before I was an elected official. And I want to thank everyone for realizing its importance a little belatedly, but taking advantage of these opportunities. It is so important that we as SBCAG can move quickly, where the starts and stops prior to that were smaller organizations or those that didn't engage the entire county. So it is with great appreciation that not only my community, but the entirety of Santa Barbara County will benefit from this. And thank you to all of you doing direct advocacy, because it's a game changer if we can make sure our rural community members have the same access that those of us inside the urban areas do, while improving the redundancy for those of us in the urban areas, because we saw that as a huge problem during the pandemic. All right, I will happily move the recommendation from staff forward.
Second.
And Director Patino seconds. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Infanti?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Park?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-0.
Thank you. Item 5C, please read that into record.
Thank you. Item 5C, unmet transit needs process direction. 5C1, direct staff to carry out the fiscal year 2023-24 unmet transit needs process, assuming no associated Transportation Development Act funding will be allocated pursuant to Article 8 of the Transportation Development Act. 5C2, direct staff to carry out the fiscal year 2023-24 unmet transit needs process with the assumption that a portion of Associated Transportation Development Act funding may be allocated pursuant to Article 8 of the Transportation Development Act.
Mr. Becker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Osborne, directors. My name is Mike Becker, and today I'm going to present an item on the annual unmet transit needs process. So next slide. And what Terry just read here, the two options for recommended action, and as I'll discuss in a minute, the Transportation Development Act allows for funds not used for transit, assuming certain conditions are met, to be used for other purposes such as paving roads. As the board has indicated in prior years, they would not enable funding to go towards the non-transit purposes. We began to ask this question in advance, which enables us to plan our work and also to not misinform the public through the process. So the two options are directing us to carry out the process assuming that the board will not allow funds to go to non-transit purposes, which is option 1, or that funds may go to non-transit purposes, which is option 2. Next slide, please. So a little bit of history on the Transportation Development Act. It was passed in, I believe, 1971, and the act is the primary mechanism for the state's funding of transit services. When it was passed, there was a conflict between the urban interests and the rural interests, with the rural interests saying that they didn't need all of the funding to satisfy the transit need of the community, therefore that they should be able to use it for other purposes. And the result of that was why we're here today. We go through this annual unmet transit needs process to determine if there are transit needs that are reasonable to meet or not reasonable to meet. And if we do find that there's no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet, that frees up that excess funds for non-transit purposes. The Act also requires us to maintain social services Transit Advisory Committee, which in our region we have named the Santa Barbara County Transit Advisory Committee, and that committee guides this process. Next slide. Within the Transportation Development Act, there are two sources of funding. The State Transit Assistance, which we're not talking about today, it's formula-based. It goes to the transit providers. It has certain allowable uses, which are not in question. So that's a portion of it. What we are talking about today is the local transportation fund portion of the Transportation Development Act, and that provides funding for transit, and that's the portion that may be used for non-transit purposes if certain conditions are met. So next slide. So this is an overview. It's a little bit dated, but I think it still holds true of just how the transit services in North County are funded, with roughly 30% or 29% coming from federal transit agency funds. And then the state provides the biggest share of funding for transit. More than half, 55%. And the bulk of that is the funding that's in question, the local transportation fund, 88%. So if you multiply two together, roughly 45% of all transit funding is in this local transportation fund pot. And then finally, there's local sources of funding that supplement the transit services, which are the fares that people pay to ride the services. Measure A provides subsidy, and then some of the transit providers also have advertising or leasing property, other ways to generate revenue. So next slide, please. So this is the current allocations for the local transportation fund allocation. And what I wanted to highlight here is see the county has an asterisk on it there, and at the bottom you can see the county of the county's allocation. They pass on almost $2.9 million to other transit agencies to supplement or to subsidize their services. And that leaves the county with about $450,000 unspent, and that's ultimately what we're talking about today. And you'll see in a next slide. So the county receives about $3.3 million, gives $2.9 million to other transit providers, which leaves about $450,000 with the county. So next slide. So this is just the history. You saw this last year. It's a good graph highlighting the amount of funding that historically has gone into streets and roads. So this is the amount of funds back the last 20 so years of funding going into streets and roads. So that's the local transportation fund portion, not used for transit. used for other purposes. And you could see back in the early 2000s, it was pretty high. It was north of $3 million, $3.5 million. And then in 2006, which was the last time we had an unmet transit need that was reasonable to meet, that resulted in the Breeze 100 service, which comes out of Santa Maria, goes down the 135 and the 1, serves Vandenberg and Allen Hancock College and then to Lompoc. That knocked it down significantly, and then it began to rise again, and then around 2014, 2015, Lompoc started saving money for its transit facility, which left just the county as the sole agency still using funds for streets and roads. And then starting in 2019, the board started telling us that they weren't going to allow funds for non-transit purposes, which zeroed it out, and it has remained zero since. Next slide, please. So throughout the process, we conduct a public outreach, and we do that to engage the public and to determine what potential unmet transit needs are out there to get the public's to take the public's pulse on the transit services that are offered, and we do that in either scenario. If you choose option 1 or option 2, we're still going to do the public process. We're going to still go out and try and determine what potential unmet transit needs are out there. If the board chooses option 1, then we compare whatever feedback we receive against the definition that the board approved way back in 2006 to determine if it's an unmet transit need. Next slide. And then if it is an unmet transit need, then we compare it against these criteria to determine if it's reasonable to meet. And essentially, it has to be supporting itself to the level that other similar routes support itself at. If say, for instance, Santa Maria, the average fare box return is 20%, would have to say, does this, if we required the service to operate, would it also meet roughly the same fare box recovery? So we say, but the end result is it's actually pretty hard to find something that's that meets the definition of unmet transit need and also satisfies the criteria as being reasonable to meet. And as I mentioned, it's been since 2006 since there was an actual unmet transit need that was reasonable to meet. Next slide, please. So this is a Venn diagram of the process, and as I mentioned, this is option A and option B. That should read option 1 and option 2, and option 1 and option 2, we do the public outreach. We make an effort to determine what the potential unmet transit needs are. With option 1, we take those comments, we include them in a memorandum, and distribute that to the transit providers, and that's the end of the process. If with option 2, which enables the non-transit uses, we analyze the comments, do they satisfy that definition of an unmet transit need? And if they do, then we go a step further. Do they meet the criteria to be reasonable to meet? We prepare a resolution that will be brought to the board to determine if there are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet or not. We're also required to do a demographic analysis in the as part of the process. So that's essentially the difference. You could see the outside portions of the Venn diagram of between option A and option B are 1 and 2. And again, option A says the board's not going to allow these local transportation fund dollars to go for non-transit purposes. And option B, it doesn't say that you will, it just makes it a possibility. And the actual allocations would come to the board at some point in the future, and the board can say yes or no. So with that, the next slide, I believe, is the end. This is back to the recommended action of options 1 and 2. We took this to SBCAG. Unfortunately, we did not have a quorum for that meeting, so we could not get a recommendation from SBCAG. We took it to the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee, or TTAC, and they recommended option 2 for this cycle, with the vote being 8-2. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a tendency to like option 2, but my curiosity is, what's this going to do to staff? If you're going to have to spend all this time doing all of this analysis of what's going to happen, are you going to increase staff to do this?
No, Director Infante, I would not consider the workload of us in your decision. I think it's more of a policy decision related to the use of the funds and not the workload of the staff. That we can handle it in either scenario, and whatever time is freed up would just go into another project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Osborne. Real quick, the TTAC, who are the no votes on that?
The no votes were the MTD representative and the Air Pollution Control District representative.
And they were commenting on how North County unincorporated areas should spend their funds. That's okay. That was kind of more rhetorical. So what if we don't go down option 2? We choose option 1. There's $450,000 there. What happens to that money?
So the county would have to provide it to another transit provider or use it for a transit ineligible use, or eventually, I believe it's after 3 years, it goes back to the state.
Because they can bank some of that.
They can bank for several years, yeah. And Martha's in Santa Barbara, she might know that.
And I understand that there is some money banked there now, right?
Yes.
And do we know
what that balance is? I asked Martha, who keeps our books on this, and that is not something that SBCAG tracks. That is something the county would track. So I would just, I don't want to say that this is 100% accurate, but if it's $450,000 this year, you probably can make an assumption it's probably roughly the same going back. So we're talking about 1.2 million roughly.
Okay. And we might be at risk of losing some of those funds at that point?
If they're not allocated to an eligible use,
okay.
They would eventually be lost.
Go through some of the other eligible uses, if not roads. I know that sometimes bike and ped, right? I mean, there's some other things that we can do, investments in bus stops, some other kind of hardscape that's not necessarily an additional service. Can you go through those for me?
Yeah, Director Nelson, that's a good question and something that we had talked with county staff about in the past, and that was what is eligible, what could fit within this. And if, say, work on a bus stop shelter, yes. Works on sidewalks leading to bus stop shelters, the thought was yes. However, there was things like bicycle connections to bus stops or transit centers starts to become a little bit of a gray area. And the best way to do it would be go through option 2 to just say that money can be used for streets and roads, and then there's not a question if it's eligible or not. Then they can use the funds for the bicycle connections to a transit facility.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions out of Santa Barbara?
Just for the timing of having to do the process, when would you need direction by?
Director Williams, it's on our calendar for this month each year to start the process. I think we would probably still be fine if we delayed it a month and got the question answered next month.
Director Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. I'm glad that Director Williams brought that up, because I haven't heard from my public works staff about what their preference would be, which is probably my fault for not asking that in advance. I won't blame staff. So I'm actually interested in getting some feedback before I move forward with either option 1 or 2. If we waited an additional month, would that?
We can make that work, yes.
That might be helpful for me, especially if we know that some of those funds are expiring and we need to make that determination so we can go back and spend those funds. That might be important if they're waiting there. I don't want to return those funds. And then maybe we can have a little bit more of a discussion with staff about how to meet and satisfy the requirements there.
Okay.
Any more questions before we go to public comment? All right, hearing none, do we have any? Oh. Yes. All right.
Chair Osborne, Mr. Mark Chitello would like to speak.
All right.
Go ahead, Mr. Chitello.
Good morning, members of SBCAG. I'm Mark Chitello. I'm here on behalf of the Committees for Land, Air, Water, and Species. And I just want to underscore the importance of the unmet transit needs process and the centrality of the funding from the Transportation Development Act to each community's planning for alternative transportation and the types of transportation modalities that are the future. So I'm a little late to the hearing, so I haven't been able to listen to the colloquy, but it sounds like this is a matter that maybe continued by your board. I'd encourage that. This is a matter that Claus and the community have been involved with for over 25 years, including several lawsuits to ensure that the purposes and spirit of the Transportation Development Act are fulfilled. So just want to encourage the board to look very carefully at the importance of keeping adequate flow of state funding available for these alternative transportation projects and programs that have proven to be so important to the entire community. Thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you. Anyone in Santa Barbara?
Sure. I hope that we would delay this decision and really look at what it would be spent for if we kept it under option 1. It's hard for me to imagine that there's not a bus shelter or a sidewalk necessary to a bus stop somewhere in Orca. That's almost inconceivable to me. And I think it's both the sentiment that I've heard from our public works staff, that is, if there's a legitimate transit use in the county, that we should use this money for that, because this is transit money. So that's my hope, that we would really not look at it in terms of specifics.
So I will now close public comment, and we will take Director Williams' comments into fact. I would say that there are bike paths missing. I know for a fact in Lompoc, in the Lompoc Valley, there are bike paths missing to transit stops. So I won't argue the fact that we need to identify those and justify potentially utilizing option 2 as a way to fund those. But there are unincorporated areas that do not have bike paths that lead to transit stops. Director Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. And it's not just Orchid. It's Los Alamos, it's Vandenberg Village, it's the San Ynez Valley. So I might have the biggest population in my community that these funds might be connected to, but it's really throughout our county, and that's what our North County, we need to be focused on that. I'm in favor of delaying this another month to have a greater conversation. And I do want to see stuff spent on pavement, but these dollars for me don't need to be spent on pavement. But I do think there's some things that may not be under the traditional definition of a met need or unmet need, that I think our board can agree, and Mr. Shatillo can agree, that our needs out there, and we may need that option 2 to be able to do that. So maybe when we bring this back in a month, we can have at least an initial conversation of what those projects might look like. Mm-hmm. I know, we do have a lot of these active transportation plan grants that we're trying to go out there and get, and we often need to have matching funds. We're pulling that from our roads fund. So maybe those are dollars that could be pushed into those projects to give us a higher score on some of those active transportation grants. And we also have, active transportation grants that aren't going to get funded, but we still have these plans in place, and we need to have funding sources. So maybe this is something where we can, instead of another bus route, maybe we can be starting to pre-fund some of those, investments that we're actually having to go to our road fund right now to pay for. So, yeah, that's a motion.
I'll second that.
You beat me to it. It's been moved and seconded. I see our attorney has a comment to make before we take a vote.
Chair Osborne, can we just clarify the motion is to continue to next month?
Yeah, the motion is to continue the item to the next SBCAG meeting, but to also direct staff to work with county staff to come up with some additional explanation of how we would spend those if we went down option 2.
Director Patino, you just ready to vote? Okay, all right. Then let's have a roll call vote.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Fatino?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne?
Aye.
Motion passes 11-0. Okay, on to item 5D, Draft Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Communities Public participation plan. Review and comment on the draft regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy public participation plan.
And you have the floor again, Mr.
Yes,
Becker.
I do. Thank you, Chair Osborne and directors. It is a mouthful. I do have a PowerPoint. There we go. So today we're asking you to review and comment on the draft public participation plan that we will use for the public outreach process related to the update of the regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. Next slide. So as I just mentioned there, this is a recommended action, but so what I'm going to talk about today is what are our requirements in this process laid out by the state and federal governments, what we have done in prior cycles and learned from, the proposal that we would like you to review and comment on today, and then how we will determine success, and then where this goes from here. And I sprinkled in some public process photos from various other projects. This photo is one of the public workshops for the San Ynez Valley Traffic Circulation and Safety Study. Next slide, please. So requirements, there are requirements from the federal government on MPOs, or Metropolitan Planning Organizations, for public process. However, none of them are specific to the Regional Transportation Plan. Unlike the state has Senate Bill 375, which was passed in 2008, and that has specific requirements related to the public process. The California Transportation Commission does all the MPOs in California a favor by taking all requirements and distilling them into one document, the Regional Transportation Plan Guidelines. So that's ultimately the document that we use to determine what's required of us as we go through this process. So some of those requirements are we're required to seek input from a broad range of stakeholders. We're required to use workshops in the process, and based on our county size, the law requires us to have at least one public workshop. We're required to have 2 public hearings. That's also based on our size. And those hearings are just in front of the board as we lead towards adoption of the plan, which would be in 2025. We're required to maintain a single point list for stakeholders and members of the public who are interested in staying up to date on the plan. So those are some of the requirements that we have to do. Next slide. So in the 2013-2017 cycle, so that's when the plans were adopted. So the public process was actually 2 years to 1 year leading up to that. So we did a 3-phase process. We started off with stakeholder meetings. So what we do is we identified a broad range of stakeholder groups. We contacted them, tried to get on the agenda for one of their meetings or to schedule a meeting with them to go engage. And we did it. You get in front of these groups. However, I think what we found through that process was lots of times when you contact these groups and get on their agenda and you show up at their meeting and you want to do a 10-minute presentation on what we're doing and trying to get some feedback from them, it turns out they're not quite as interested as you'd hoped, and they're just encouraging you to hurry up so they can move on to their other things. So that's something that we learned in the process. We typically held 2 in-person public workshops, and we would do one in Santa Maria and one in Santa Barbara. For Regional Transportation Plan, it's difficult to get people excited, and usually staff outnumbers attendees. And then we have the 2 public hearings. So we learned through these processes. And so that led us up to the 2021 cycle, which is our current adopted plan, Connect to 2050. And we said, well, we know what we had done in the past wasn't particularly successful, so let's try something different this time around. So we went out to bid, and the result of that was we hired the Community Environmental Council to assist us with the public outreach process. However, the timing for that could not have been worse. We designed this public process. CEC hired community ambassadors, which were going to help us with the process, and then we were told to stay home. Literally, it was like we were going to hit the ground running in March 2020, the exact time that they told us to go home. But we did end up having it turned into virtual and phone calls. But through CEC, we conducted a lot of stakeholder meetings. We held 2 virtual workshops, And I will say that one of the lessons learned is it is much easier to get people engaged virtually than it is to get them to show up at a public library on a Tuesday night. And then we did the public hearings, which again are in front of the board leading to the adoption process. So that's what we've done in the past. Next slide. And so here's what we're proposing. And on the left there you see the contributing factors. So I think it's important to recognize in this cycle, just based off of reviewing the plan and anything that's changed since, we're not changing, there's no RENA tied to this plan. There's very limited, if any, new funding. Measure A continues, and we're continuing to implement Measure A. We have not updated our demographic forecast for this cycle. We'll do that after. So essentially, there was not a lot at stake in this cycle. So, and that's, I previously presented to the board and said, since we know that there's probably not a lot's going to change in the plan, we're going to focus on improving certain aspects of it. So that's kind of what we're focused on. So we also wanted to do that. We didn't want to go crazy with the public outreach, knowing that there's not a whole lot at stake. And then we're taking the lessons that we've learned in the past, and then on top of that, we have to consider what's required of us. So on the right there, you see what we're proposing. Again, 3 phases. With the first phase focused on stakeholder groups. In one of the appendices of the draft plan, which was part of the agenda item, you could see a list of it's about 30 or 40 stakeholder groups. And we're engaging with our advisory committees to grow that list. But essentially for phase 1, we will contact each of these groups and let them know of a stakeholder meeting. We will hold 1 meeting. We'll hold it in person and virtually simultaneously. And we'll also record it so people can refer to it after the process. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is going 2 public workshops. We'll do 1 in person somewhere in the middle of the county, whether that be Buellton or Solvang, and then 1 virtual. And so that's where we've seen better participation in the past. So we definitely want to do the virtual, and then the hearings don't change. So that's what we're proposing for this cycle. Next slide. We do have a couple other things that we're going to do to complement the process. Develop and maintain a project website, which actually just went live yesterday. We're going to do that requirement of maintaining developing and maintaining a single point contact list, so we can let people know when there are meetings in front of this board or in front of the Joint Technical Advisory Committee, that they can also provide input there. We're going to develop a frequently asked questions document, which will help explain what the plan is and what it does. Probably every month or every other month, there's an item related to the plan that goes to the advisory committees. They're all Brown Act meetings, and that provides an opportunity for public comment. And then every few months, there's something coming to the board related to the regional transportation plan, which is also an opportunity for public comment. We will reach out to the media and try and get some coverage to also hopefully increase participation in the process. And then everything that we do will be available in both English and Spanish. Next slide. So how do we determine if we're successful in the process? We want to drive participation. We don't want staff to outnumber attendees at workshops. We will document the process and use all the tools in our tool bag to try and drive participation. We will continue to evaluate what's working and what's not working, and adjust as necessary, and it also informs the future cycles. We will dissect the comments we receive to get to the issues that people are raising, and then we'll track those issues to see how they influence the plan or how they don't influence the plan. But we'll take comments from the time people provide them to what results of those comments going forward. Next slide. So following today's board review and comment, we'll circulate it for a 45-day public review process. We'll go back to the advisory committee for a recommendation of approval during its November meeting. We'll come back to the board in November, probably be on consent unless there's significant changes, to approve the public participation plan, and then after it's approved, we'll hit the ground running, starting with that phase one, which will start engaging the stakeholders and arranging the public in-person and virtual hybrid public meeting, and then start working towards the workshops in phase two. Next slide. So that's all I have. Again, today is just review and comment, and you're welcome to send comments anytime, whether it be today or after today.
Any questions for staff? All right. Any public comment on this item?
Chair Osborne, yes, we have one request for public comment, again from Mr. Mark Chitello. Go ahead, Mr. Chitello.
Good morning again, members of the board. Mark Chitello for the Committees for Land, Air, Water, and Species. As a person that's been involved in transportation planning processes for over 3 decades, and including representing a number of groups that have been engaged in this process, it's kind of disappointing to be left off all the lists. Staff has indicated that they reached out to all the nonprofit organizations, but I've never had the dignity of that presented to any of the organizations that I've brought forward. Recognize that transportation planning is an extremely complex and arcane topic for the lay public. People don't know how to engage in this, they don't know how they're impacted by it, and they don't know how to represent and advocate for the interests that they have in this process. It's important to make your public participation relevant. Clearly, there is a need to reach out to disadvantaged communities and communities that are disproportionately impacted by the transportation system. That would include people living within 1/4 to a 1/2 mile of all of our freeways. It's been shown there's ample evidence of high levels of air pollutant exposure from location in that area. Why aren't those people being engaged more actively in the regional transportation planning process? Shouldn't they have a voice in this process? And that's just an example of one of the kinds of interests that are implicated in regional transportation planning. There was a commitment through the Highway 101 planning process to implement both the widened 101 freeway and commuter rail as a means to provide alternative transportation mechanisms to meet the jobs housing imbalance and the need for commuter traffic. And as you all know well, the 101 widening project traffic models show that traffic will get worse after the widening is completed. So widening the highway is going to provide a Band-Aid solution, short-term benefits for southbound traffic, but northbound traffic in the morning will actually be worse than it was before the project was started. So there's a need to be more proactive and ensure that the interests that are implicated in regional transportation planning are actually brought to the table. I would suggest that SBCAG consider offering community engagement stipends to disaffected and underrepresented communities to be able to develop the expertise to understand and engage in these technical processes.
Thank you, Mr. Chitello. Your time is up. Any other public comment out of Santa Barbara or Santa Maria?
Chair Osborne, there's no more requests for public comment in Santa Maria.
And from Santa Barbara either.
Thank you so very much. We will close public comment and bring it back to directors for comment. Otherwise, thank you for that update.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Kern, Executive Director's Report.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the board. It feels like it's been a while since I talked to everyone. It's with the special meeting that we had this month and no sub-regional meetings, or I wasn't at the sub-regional meeting. So I'll start with the State Route 166 corridor study. In a move to improve the safety and mobility of State Route 166 between Santa Maria and Guadalupe, SBCAG was awarded $250,000 of Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant to complete a comprehensive corridor study. We set to begin this in 2024 with the partnership with Santa Maria and Guadalupe, and look at safety, mobility, access management, greenhouse gas emission reductions, dust abatement, and agricultural goods movement. So we're looking forward to implementing that to improve the lives of those who live and travel through that study area. I want to also let the board know that we Measure A revenues reached a new peak, the highest ever. Our voter-approved transportation sales tax measure, Measure A, experienced significant increase in collected sales tax for 2022-23. We set a new fiscal record, reaching $54.9 million from July 1 to 2022 to June 30th, 2023. It represents a 1.6% increase from our previous, so this is going in the right direction. You know, we don't like it to go down; we like it to continue to go up. It's a small up, but we still like it. And in comparison to the most recent fiscal year in the pandemic, we have a 34% increase from 2018-2019. So that is good news there. I do want to let the board know that the proposed fare increase outreach is continuing for the Clean Air Express. We're continuing that outreach until October 13th. This was originally approved prior to the pandemic in 2019, but we delayed the implementation of the fare increase because of the pandemic and the ridership issues that all transit agencies were having. But now we are implementing that again because we do need the revenue to continue that service. We hosted 2 in-person listening sessions in Lompoc and Santa Maria this in the past, and we are continuing to outreach to the riders and through surveys. So there is a survey that is online that people can fill out, and if you need that information, let me know. We are also in the process of revamping our coordinated public transit human service transportation plan. That's also a mouthful. This is a plan to improving transportation services for the vulnerable residents of our community and our special social services agencies, and coordinating their transportation services that they provide to seniors, people with disabilities, low-income individuals, limited English speakers, and veterans in their hurdles, their transportation hurdles that they face within our county. So we're endeavoring to coordinate those transportation services and reduce cost, and also provide quality service. So that's ongoing. I do want to let the board know that the California State Transportation Agency, also known as Cal STA, is hosting a Low Sand Corridor Executive Task Force meeting in San Diego on October 10th to talk about coastal resiliency and erosion challenges. So when staff was alerted to this meeting, we said, we have those challenges as well in the north part of the corridor. So we have been outreaching to Cal STA to have a North County meeting, and we'll let you know about that. But the overall intent of the task force is to discuss topics that will affect the entire corridor, including initiatives, projects, and strategies, and funding to establish better resiliency along the rail corridor. And a comment that was made in the public comments about commuter rail, we do have some updates on that. We plan on bringing that to the sub-regional and the board in October, or is that November? So in the next couple months, we will give an update on the commuter. We are working on implementing commuter rail as directed by the board in your goals for the agency, and we hope to have some really good news coming soon. So a little teaser right there. With that, I'll pass it back to the board chair for her to take over. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that. Item number 7, Caltrans report.
Hello again, everyone. John Olenek, Caltrans District 5. Thanks for having me here today. With me, I have from our senior planning team, Bailey Barton, and Bailey join me today because she's going to help us with a lot of our activities going on for the time being in Santa Barbara County, as well as she also works in San Luis Obispo County, our neighbor to the north. In fact, I might be inviting Bailey to attend the sub-regional meetings as the next one coming up. So I just want to have a chance to have her meet everyone. Your executive director mentioned the good news about the planning grant that was awarded for Highway 166. For every good award, there's also a next season. So we are upon the next planning grant season. So I wanted to mention that there will be a call for applications for other ideas within the same program, Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Program. The call for applications will be coming October 5th, and we will be holding a District 5 or for our area workshop on October 12th at 1:30. So I wanted to make sure that all opportunities to seek as many planning grants in our community is found, and we are very successful here in District 5 for all 5 of our counties. As you know, there's ongoing work now that has begun on Highway 101 at San Jose Creek, both on the Highway 101 side and the Highway 217 side next to UCSB. I understand there was some concerns about the approach to some of the off-ramps there at Highway 101 and 217. I understand those have been corrected and improved. But certainly, if things like that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're glad to adjust as needed to keep the road as safe as possible for everyone. And we've, over the course of today's meeting, talked a little bit about engagement. I think I even spoke a little bit about this morning in our earlier comments. And engagement is such an important thing in all of our projects and all of our efforts. During today's meeting, I was just sitting looking around thinking, going almost around this entire room, I'll be able to be working with many of you and your staff on some engagement activities for our projects. City of Lompoc, even yesterday, we had a really good meeting with your senior staff about a Complete Streets project that we're working to develop together. Certainly, City of Solving, our Alamo Pintado Bridge project, we're going to want to work, certainly with you and your staff. It's really important to let the public know, but certainly we've been trying to work first with our partners, with you and with your staff, so that everyone is on board with the efforts. And if there is opportunity for collaboration, if there's input needed, even from you first, we want to talk about that. We want to have that conversation. So thank you. So that concludes my report. Happy to take any comments, questions.
Director Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. This might be also for Director Kern, based on her report on the 166. I just want to make sure that you guys are looking at the Bonita School traffic as well as a part of that. It's a school that all the students there are bused in, and so there's quite a few potentially safety issues there. So I want to make sure that that's looked at right there at 166 and Bonita School Road. So then going back to Caltrans, my understanding is they're going to be doing some cleanup underneath the bridge, the Santa Maria River Bridge, here in October. I had a meeting with some Caltrans staff that attended our homeless encampment a meeting that we had yesterday because we got the state grant to clear the Santa Maria River and deal with some of the homelessness issues there. I was concerned that Caltrans did not offer any ideas or solutions for actually housing the people that they were going to dislocate. Was hoping that they could be engaged. I know all of us as municipalities have to do that, and so it just seems a little odd to me that Caltrans, the big dog here, doesn't have to abide by those types of requirements as well. So just trying to get additional engagement on making sure that those services and housing options are provided for those that are displaced through some of these cleanup operations.
Anyone in Santa Barbara? Hearing none. Mr. Legit.
Sure, happy to respond. Thank you for the comment. Certainly the issues with the unhoused and the unsheltered are sensitive and they're complicated. And when we, as a transportation agency, when we do our work, we first have to seek approvals from the highest levels of state government before we can even do any of our encampment cleanups. And so we first step is we work with our local partners, before we can do anything, because, the housing element, there's the transportation element, the cleanup, and then the housing element too. So as far as the Santa Maria River Bridge, as you know, most of the encampments are out of the state right away, but there are those that are under the bridge. Just so that everyone knows the dates and times involved, October 5th is our walkthrough. October 11th and 12th will be our cleanup. And I know we've had those recent meetings with the county's encampment coordinators, and if there are additional meetings that need to happen, certainly our encampment coordinators are glad to work with everyone at that staff-to-staff level. But it is definitely a sensitive and sad issue, really, and we just have to work closely with our partners, those who have the legal and appropriate means to deal with the housing part of the encampment issue.
All right, seeing no additional questions, we'll thank you for that report and we'll bring it to item 8, 1-minute reports. Anyone in Santa Barbara have a 1-minute report?
We have no one wishing to speak.
All right, thank you. Anyone here have a 1-minute report? Director Julian.
Yes, I wanted to thank, several weeks ago, the Board of Supervisors approved $8 million for the San Maria River debris removal. I didn't have a chance to thank you then, but that's quite an achievement to move money around to make that happen. And I do believe the next day they were out there moving sand. And if you go out there now, you wouldn't believe it looks like the dunes is just pushed out, and there's actually a channel moving through there. They're actually moving the contractors 24/7 right now working. And I know that there's a push to go to 24/6 to have that, because the Sundays are extremely expensive. And Greg Hart was out there, as was Limon, and they've offered us to go, city staff or council to go and look at it. But we know it's windy out there and it's sandy, so we'll look at from it afar. The electric bus last Friday was delivered to Guadalupe from 3C. Santa Barbara SBCAG staff was there too. That particular bus is going to stay en route in Guadalupe, and we're looking at the charging. It's pretty complex in terms of the charging and where to locate that. But we have a location for the bus. On the parade last week, I have been participating in several parades. I've never seen that many kids on the road, on Highway 1, and it's pretty spooky in the sense that we have a huge youth population, and I really appreciate the county, Caltrans, the county SBCAG staff for really putting their arms around Guadalupe. It's very important to us. We don't feel that we're outside the realm of county government or state governments. We really appreciate that. So that's more than a minute, but thank you.
No, absolutely, and Guadalupe deserves all that love and support, and it just goes to show, if the county comes together, how much we can support each other. I want to thank Caltrans. I think you're close to being done with paving Ocean. It is a huge difference, and it is a nice change to our community, and we look forward to the additional projects you're working on with us to accomplish, given you control our 2 major thoroughfares, and so there's much work to be done there. I know Alice may not mention this, but I'm a huge supporter of open streets, and Santa Maria has their open streets coming up in October. And while I'd love to be there, I can't, but I encourage everybody to get out and experience those. It really does change how you view your community when you walk and ride your bike in an area that you might just drive through. So that's my 1-minute report. Director Patino.
Yes, thank you. We just about, little less than a month ago, did a ribbon cutting and a groundbreaking on the Japanese Community Cultural Center right off of College Drive here. And the Japanese community raised over $300,000 that they donated to our recs and parks. We have started repaving, slurry sealing, and redoing a lot of our streets. The head of our streets and sidewalks has put a sort of a prioritize and put lists together on what streets need to be done first and sidewalks, and that's why we're attacking it. And so I drove a couple of the streets yesterday that had been repaired, so those are the things you get people calling you for, is when they hit potholes. So thank you to our roads department.
All right, hearing no one else for 1-minute reports, we'll bring it to item number 9, committee meetings. Director Nelson, do you have anything to report out for Calvans?
Yes, thank you, Chair Osborne. We, in August, had our very first Caltrans lobbying day, where we met with various committee members, trying to see if we can get additional funding for Calvans into the climate bond. So we had some conversations there about potentially having some additional resources to continue to fund the good work that's being done by Calvans. Just for everybody, Calvans at this point has saved over 1 billion miles through carpooling. We have about 800 vans on the road. at any given time. All of them with telemetrics, making sure that they monitor the speeds and the safety, the braking. We're now actually going to have cameras in the vans as well to monitor the drivers to make sure that they are driving safely, not texting or other things like that. But I believe we have a great accident rate because of all those safety measures. And we're actually looking at saving some additional money by maybe even self-insuring at this point, since we have had such a low accident rate, so that we can go ahead and make those rates even less expensive. The big news, though, is that we've purchased, or at least come in agreement to purchase, over 400 electric vans. It's the largest purchase in the country that we'll be deploying. I will report that I actually voted against this, not because I'm against the concept, but it's actually increasing our fleet by 50%, and it's I'm a little concerned on actually the operation of it and whether we have the infrastructure in place to do it. I was in favor of a smaller purchase, but the board felt like that they needed to maximize some grant opportunities. We're getting about half of it paid through some, I believe, a housing bond, but it still makes our vans more expensive than our normal ones. We will be, most of these vans will be going out to affordable housing projects throughout the state of California, including Escalante Meadows will be the recipient of some of these additional vans in Santa Barbara County. So I'm rooting for it to work. I'm just a little concerned about the operations of whether we can handle that all at once and what we might have to do. Potentially the climate bond might be something that can help subsidize that moving forward if it becomes a big financial burden. So exciting, I guess, update or newsworthy.
Thank you. Director Williams, do you have a report out for the LoSAN board meeting?
Yeah, this is Director Rouse. Director Williams had to leave, so I'm going to give this report as the alternate. His last meeting, they report that ridership is up significantly, not quite to pre-pandemic levels, but getting there, and that they are, I guess there's some slight complication between the Metrolink and the Amtrak link ride ticket, but they are working that out. It should be resolutions.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you. And with that, we will adjourn until the next meeting on October 19th, 2023. Thank you all.